Yastor, the Lost City of Z. In April 1925, one of the world's most experienced explorers marched into the Brazilian Amazon with his son and one companion. He carried coordinates for a place he called Zed, an advanced civilization hidden in the jungle that he had spent decades researching. He had been there before. He knew exactly where he was going. He never returned. Colonel Percy Fawcett wasn't a dreamer or amateur. He was a decorated British military officer, trained surveyor, and veteran of dozens of expeditions into South America's most unforgiving terrain. He had mapped borders for the Royal Geographical Society, survived encounters with hostile tribes, and earned a reputation for meticulous documentation. When he claimed to have found evidence of an advanced lost city, the scientific establishment took notice. His evidence came from multiple sources. Indigenous oral histories consistently described a great city of stone deep in the Mato Grosso region, ruled by people with light skin who possessed advanced knowledge. Portuguese colonial documents from the 1750s described a ruined city found by bandeirantes, Brazilian slave hunters, complete with paved streets, carved arches, and hieroglyphic inscriptions. A mysterious stone tablet covered in unknown writing had been found in the region and sent to Rio de Janeiro, where it subsequently disappeared without explanation. But his most compelling evidence came from earlier expeditions. In 1908, while surveying the border between Brazil and Bolivia, Fawcett encountered a previously unknown tribe who told him of a vast city hidden in the mountains. They described buildings of white stone, broad avenues, and a population that had lived there for longer than anyone remembered. They showed him artifacts, pottery, and carved stones that didn't match any known Amazonian culture. The craftsmanship was too sophisticated, the designs too complex. During a subsequent expedition in 1920, he claimed to have actually seen the city from a distance. In letters to his wife, he described watching smoke rise from organized settlements in a valley that wasn't supposed to exist. He observed cultivated fields stretching for miles, structures that reflected sunlight as if made of polished stone or metal, and what appeared to be roads connecting multiple population centers. He turned back only because supplies were depleted and several expedition members were seriously ill with fever. For the next 5 years, Fawcett planned his return meticulously. He studied every colonial document he could find, interviewed dozens of indigenous sources, and assembled what he believed was a precise route to the city. He kept the exact location secret, fearing that others might reach it first, or that the civilization might hide itself from large expeditions. His final message came on May 29, 1925, from a location called Dead Horse Camp. He wrote that he was about to enter unexplored territory and expected to reach his destination within days. After that, silence. Over the next century, more than 100 people died trying to find Fawcett or the city he sought. 13 expeditions vanished entirely. Others returned with fragments of information. Stories from indigenous peoples about 3 white men living with a tribe in the interior, or reports of an elderly man matching Fawcett's description, seen years after his disappearance. None of this was ever verified. What's most disturbing isn't the disappearance, but what happened to supporting evidence. The stone tablet he referenced disappeared from the Rio de Janeiro Museum. Colonial documents were destroyed in a fire. Indigenous tribes who had spoken of the city suddenly claimed no knowledge. Artifacts he'd sent to England vanished from storage. It was as if someone was systematically erasing all evidence that the city existed. Modern satellite surveys have revealed geometric patterns and earthworks in the exact region he explored. Archaeological excavations have discovered remnants of sophisticated settlements, but the specific city he described, the one he claimed to have seen with his own eyes, has never been found. The White City of Honduras. In 1940, an American adventurer and journalist emerged from the Honduran jungle with an extraordinary claim. He had found La Ciudad Blanca, the legendary white city that Spanish conquistadors had sought for centuries. He had walked its streets, documented its structures, and made contact with its inhabitants. But before he could lead an expedition back, he was found dead under mysterious circumstances, and the city vanished from the map. The legend of the White City had tantalized explorers since the 1500s. Spanish accounts described a fabulous city deep in the Mosquitia rainforest, filled with gold and ruled by an unknown civilization. Indigenous Peak people spoke of the City of the Monkey God, that their ancestors had abandoned after a terrible catastrophe. Hernan Cortés himself had sent expeditions to find it, all of which returned empty-handed or didn't return at all. Theodore Moore Day was sponsored by the Museum of the American Indian and backed by the High Foundation. He spent months preparing, learning indigenous languages, and gathering information from local sources who claimed to know the city's general location. In 1940, he entered the Musquedia with a small team and disappeared into some of Earth's densest jungle. His expedition journals describe weeks of difficult travel, encounters with indigenous guides who seemed to know exactly where he was heading, and eventual arrival at a site exceeding his expectations. He described massive stone walls covered in vegetation, carved monuments depicting monkey figures, a central plaza larger than any in Mesoamerica, and evidence of a population that had lived there relatively recently. Food stores remained in some buildings. Tools lay where they had been dropped. It was as if the inhabitants had left suddenly and never returned. Most significantly, Moore claimed to have made contact with people still living near the city. He described them as secretive but not hostile, willing to show him the ruins, but warning that outsiders were not welcome to stay. They told him the city had been abandoned generations ago after a curse fell upon it, but that guardians remained to protect its secrets. Moore returned to the United States a celebrity. Newspapers across the country published his accounts of the discovery. The High Foundation announced plans for a major expedition to excavate the city. Moore himself began organizing the return journey, promising to reveal the city's exact location once the expedition was properly funded and equipped. Then things went wrong. His expedition journals were stolen from his hotel room. Several artifacts he had brought back disappeared from museum storage. Key team members died in accidents or suddenly refused to discuss what they'd seen. Moore became increasingly paranoid, telling friends that he was being followed and that powerful people didn't want the city found. He began sleeping with a gun under his pillow. On June 26, 1954, Theodore Moore was found hanging in his parents' bathroom. His death was ruled suicide, but friends and family disputed this vigorously. His detailed notes on the city's location were never found. The route he had mapped existed only in his memory, and that memory died with him. But in 2015, using lighter technology penetrating jungle canopy, researchers discovered a massive archaeological site in the Musquedia, exactly where Moore claimed. The ruins showed evidence of a sophisticated civilization that flourished for centuries before suddenly abandoning their city. Excavations recovered artifacts matching Moore's descriptions. The discovery validated Moore's account decades after his death. Yet the most important question remains unanswered. Who didn't want the city found, and what happened to the guardians Moore claimed to have met? The hidden kingdom of the Himalayas. In the 1st century AD, a Greek philosopher undertook a journey to India that would become one of antiquity's greatest mysteries. According to his biographer, he didn't just visit known kingdoms. He traveled beyond them to a hidden civilization in the mountains, possessing knowledge and technology far beyond the ancient world. When later travelers tried to follow his route, they found nothing. Apollonius of Tyana was one of the ancient world's most renowned figures, a philosopher, mystic, and traveler whose reputation rivaled Pythagoras and Jesus. His journey to India was documented extensively by disciples who accompanied him and later compiled by Philostratus using letters, testimonies, and official records. Beyond the Indus River, his account takes a strange turn. He describes being guided by mysterious escorts to a hidden city in the Himalayas, the abode of the wise, where an isolated civilization had preserved knowledge from before the Great Flood. The guides appeared at his camp one evening without warning and told him he had been expected. He describes this civilization in remarkable detail. They lived in a city generating its own light, requiring neither torches nor fires after dark. Their buildings were constructed from material appearing neither stone nor metal, warm to the touch regardless of weather. They possessed mirrors showing events in distant locations as they happened. They had vehicles moving without horses or oxen. They had preserved texts from civilizations existing before recorded history began. The philosophers welcomed him, recognizing him as worthy of their secrets. He studied with them for 4 months, learning sciences and arts unknown to Greeks. They taught healing techniques he would later demonstrate throughout the Roman world, techniques that seemed like miracles to those who witnessed them. They showed him machines predicting celestial events centuries in advance. They revealed knowledge of the human body that wouldn't be rediscovered until modern times. When he left, he was warned the city's location must never be revealed to those unprepared for its knowledge. The guides led him out by a circuitous route designed to be impossible to retrace. Apollonius honored his oath, never revealing precise details, but others tried to find it. Roman expeditions during several emperors' reigns ventured into the mountains beyond India. All either returned having found nothing or failed to return at all. Chinese travelers heading west reported rumors of a hidden kingdom, but could never locate it. The civilization Apollonius documented seemed to have vanished, or hidden itself from those who came looking. What makes this account intriguing is its consistency with later legends. Tibetan traditions speak of Shambhala, a hidden kingdom possessing advanced knowledge. Indian texts describe Agartha, an underground realm of enlightened beings. These legends may preserve memory of the same civilization, one that chose to remain hidden from a world not ready for its knowledge. Modern expeditions using satellite imagery have identified unusual geometric formations in remote Himalayan valleys, structures that appear artificial but have never been reached on foot. The Kalahari Ruins. In 1885, a British explorer crossed the Kalahari Desert and claimed to have discovered ancient city ruins partially buried in sand. His photographs and descriptions sparked decades of search expeditions, all finding nothing. The city had vanished into the desert as completely as if it had never existed. Guillermo Farini's expedition was originally intended to study the Bushmen of the Kalahari and collect specimens for European museums. But weeks into the journey, his guides led him to the place of the old people, ruins he immediately recognized as artificial structures of enormous antiquity. He described walls of precisely fitted stone, extending for hundreds of meters, half buried in sand dunes. He found carved blocks arranged in geometric patterns, including a distinctive avenue, two parallel walls leading to a central structure that might have been a temple or palace. He photographed the ruins extensively and collected artifacts, including carved stones and ceramic fragments bearing unknown symbols. His 1886 account created a sensation. Here was physical evidence of an advanced civilization in a region supposedly inhabited only by primitive hunter-gatherers. The implications challenged prevailing racial theories of the Victorian era. If Africans had built great cities in the distant past, entire colonial ideologies would require revision. Expeditions immediately set out to verify his discovery, following his route as precisely as possible, using his detailed descriptions and photographs as guides. None found anything. The Kalahari contained no ancient ruins, no carved stones, no evidence of the civilization he described. His discovery was dismissed as fabrication or delusion. But Farini was a fellow of the Royal Geographical Society, known for meticulous documentation. His photographs showed structures that couldn't be easily faked with 1880s technology. His descriptions contained specific measurements, compass orientations, and geological observations suggesting actual observation rather than imagination. Throughout the 20th century, expeditions continued searching. Some found natural rock formations that might, with generous interpretation, match his descriptions. Others found nothing at all. The Kalahari kept its secrets. Then researchers noticed something troubling about his photographs. The ruins appeared partially exposed, as if recently uncovered by shifting sands. But the Kalahari's dunes move constantly, blown by desert winds. Any structures exposed in 1885 could be buried under dozens of feet of sand within a decade. Recent ground-penetrating radar surveys have detected anomalies beneath the Kalahari's surface in the region he explored. Geometric patterns and density variations consistent with buried structures. These findings have renewed interest in his account. Perhaps he did find an ancient city, one the desert immediately reclaimed, hiding it from all subsequent explorers until technology could peer beneath the sands. The vanishing tribes. In the 1890s, a British explorer conducted expeditions into unexplored regions of Southeast Asia, Africa, and South America. His photographs documented encounters with previously unknown civilizations. people living in sophisticated settlements, practicing advanced agriculture, possessing artifacts of remarkable craftsmanship. When later expeditions visited his documented locations, they found only empty jungle. Every civilization he photographed had vanished. Alfred Isaac Middleton was a naturalist by training, more interested in documenting unknown species than making geographical discoveries. But his expeditions repeatedly encountered human settlements that weren't supposed to exist, communities that had somehow escaped contact with expanding colonial empires. His most famous photographs came from an 1894 Borneo expedition. The images show an undocumented people living in elaborate wooden structures built high in the forest canopy, surrounded by terraced gardens, possessing sophisticated metalwork that suggested advanced metallurgy. He spent 3 weeks with this community, documenting their customs and language, estimating their population at several thousand. When Dutch administrators followed his maps in 1899, they found abandoned structures being reclaimed by jungle. Gardens were overgrown, buildings collapsing, no inhabitants remained. The entire population had left simultaneously, taking their possessions and leaving no trace of where they had gone. Local tribes claimed no knowledge of the vanished people. Similar patterns emerged from other expeditions. In 1891, he documented a Congo settlement with architecture unlike any known African tradition. Circular stone buildings with domed roofs arranged in precise geometric patterns. By 1900, the site was empty, the buildings already crumbling. In 1896, he photographed a Brazilian Amazon community living in stone buildings partially covered by vegetation, as if they had occupied ancient ruins. A 1902 expedition found only the stones, with no evidence of recent habitation. Middleton became increasingly disturbed by this pattern. In his final journals, he wondered if his presence triggered the disappearances, if communities chose to abandon homes rather than face outside contact. He noted that guides seemed to know more than they revealed, and warnings were often given about consequences of his visits. Some guides refused to approach certain areas, claiming the inhabitants had ways of knowing when strangers approached. His 1898 Himalayan expedition was his last. He documented a monastery-like settlement, occupied by people practicing disciplines predating any known Buddhist lineage. His photographs show elaborate temples carved into cliffsides and gardens, growing plants he couldn't identify in any botanical reference. Middleton never returned. His journals and photographic plates were recovered by a search party, but his body was never found. The settlement couldn't be located. The cliffsides showed only natural rock formations, with no evidence that structures had ever existed there. The photographs remain in London archives. They show real people, real buildings, real civilizations. But the places they depict no longer exist, if they ever did. The Amazon civilization. In 1541, a Spanish conquistador led an expedition east from Quito, Ecuador, searching for the legendary land of cinnamon. What his expedition found instead was something far more remarkable, a vast civilization along the Amazon River that would vanish so completely that later explorers doubted it ever existed. The expedition was a disaster by any measure. Of the 4,000 soldiers, servants, and indigenous allies who set out, fewer than 100 returned alive. But among the survivors was Francisco de Orellana, who separated from the main expedition and became the first European to navigate the Amazon's entire length. His account of what he saw would be dismissed as fantasy for 4 centuries. Orellana described Amazon riverbanks as densely populated, with large settlements visible almost continuously for thousands of miles. He encountered a civilization called the Omagua, living in vast cities connected by roads, practicing intensive agriculture matching European nations' scale, fielding armies so large the Spanish barely escaped with their lives. He described the Omagua as possessing sophisticated pottery, woven textiles, and religious temples decorated with gold and silver. The most famous encounter came with warrior women so fierce the river was named for them, the Amazons. These female warriors attacked his expedition with such ferocity that several Spaniards were killed before they could escape downstream. When later expeditions traveled the Amazon in the 1600s and 1700s, they found nothing matching Orellana's descriptions. The riverbanks were sparsely populated by small, semi-nomadic tribes, No great cities, no roads, no evidence of the civilization he described. The Amazon was declared impenetrable wilderness inhabited only by primitive peoples. For centuries, Orellana was dismissed as a liar or fantasist. His account of millions of people seemed impossible. The jungle couldn't support such populations, and there was no archaeological evidence of cities or intensive agriculture. Then, in the late 20th century, archaeologists began finding evidence he had told the truth. Satellite imagery revealed vast geometric earthworks along the Amazon, remnants of roads, settlements, and agricultural systems supporting millions. Soil analysis discovered terra preta, enriched earth created only by centuries of intensive cultivation. Population estimates were revised from a few 100,000 to potentially 10 million or more. The Omagua had been real, but something had destroyed them so completely that within a century of Orellana's voyage, their civilization had vanished. That something was European disease. Smallpox, measles, and influenza spread ahead of the conquistadors, killing up to 90% of the indigenous population before most had ever seen a white face. The great Amazon civilization died before it could be properly documented, leaving only Orellana's dismissed testimony and geometric scars visible from space. The Tasade controversy. In 1971, a Philippine government official announced a discovery that stunned the world. Deep in Mindanao's rainforests, a previously uncontacted tribe had been found living in complete isolation, unaware that the outside world existed. The Tasade became instant celebrities. Then, just as quickly, they vanished into controversy. The discovery seemed like a fairy tale. The Tasade lived in caves, wore leaves for clothing, and had no words for weapons, war, or hostility. They ate wild yams and palm pith, having no knowledge of agriculture or hunting. They were presented as living fossils, Stone Age humans who had somehow survived into the modern era. Scientists, journalists, and filmmakers flocked to document them. National Geographic devoted a cover story to their discovery. Charles Lindbergh visited their caves. Anthropologists declared them the most significant discovery in their field's history. The Philippine government declared their territory protected and severely restricted access to prevent contamination of their pristine culture. Then, in 1986, following Ferdinand Marcos's fall, journalists returned and found something unexpected. The caves were empty. Nearby, they found the Tasade living in houses, wearing modern clothes, and farming like their neighbors. They claimed the discovery had been a hoax orchestrated by Manuel Elizalde, who had paid them to pose as primitive cave dwellers. The controversy exploded. Elizalde fled the Philippines with millions from a foundation supposedly protecting the Tasade. Some scientists who had studied them insisted they were genuine. Others declared them obvious fraud. The debate continues to this day. But the most disturbing aspect isn't whether they were real or fake. It's what happened regardless. The people who called themselves Tasade existed in 1971. Millions were collected for their protection. Then Elizalde fled, the foundation collapsed, and the Tasade vanished into obscurity. When researchers tried to find them in subsequent decades, they encountered only confusion. Some claiming to be Tasade told contradictory stories. Others, from the original documentation, denied ever being part of the group. The caves became impossible to locate using original directions. Whether genuine isolated tribe coerced into claiming hoax or actors abandoned when no longer useful, the Tasade disappeared, real people who ceased to exist once the cameras stopped rolling. The Patagonian Giants. When Ferdinand Magellan's expedition reached Patagonia in 1520, they encountered a race of giants, people so tall that the Europeans barely reached their waists. For the next 250 years, expedition after expedition confirmed these giants' existence. Then, suddenly, they were gone. Antonio Pigafetta, the expedition's chronicler, described these people in detail. The first giant they encountered stood so tall that the tallest Spaniard reached only to his waist. The giants wore animal skins, carried enormous bows, and had voices like bulls. Magellan named them Patagones, possibly meaning big feet, giving the region its name. Subsequent explorers confirmed the accounts. Sir Francis Drake's 1578 expedition encountered the same giants, describing people of goodly stature, significantly taller than Europeans. Dutch explorer Oliver van Noort reported giants in 1599. Countless other navigators described the same phenomenon across different decades. The reports were remarkably consistent across different nationalities and time periods. The giants were friendly but powerful, living in nomadic groups across the Patagonian plains. They were taller than any known human population, wore distinctive clothing made from guanaco skins, and spoke a language unlike any other in the region. Some accounts describe them as standing over 10 feet tall. By the mid-18th century, scientific expeditions set out specifically to study the Patagonian giants. What they found was puzzling. The indigenous Tehuelche people were indeed tall, averaging around 6 feet, unusual for the era, but hardly the 8 to 10-foot monsters earlier explorers described. Had centuries of exaggeration transformed tall people into giants? But the explanation doesn't quite fit. Early accounts were too detailed and consistent for simple exaggeration. Multiple expeditions described the same specific characteristics: the clothing, the weapons, the social organization, the distinctive language. Something real had been observed. Some researchers propose that a genetically distinct population of exceptionally tall people lived in Patagonia during the 16th and 17th centuries, perhaps numbering only a few hundred, who died out or were absorbed into other populations by the 1700s. Others suggest the original accounts described a different group entirely, people who subsequently vanished. The Tehuelche themselves have oral traditions of a giant race that preceded them in the region, powerful people who were not their ancestors but who disappeared long ago. These traditions predate European contact. What happened to the Patagonian giants? The historical record insists they were real, documented by explorers from multiple nations over 250 years. Then they simply ceased to exist. The Olmec disappearance. In 1862, a Mexican farmer clearing land in Veracruz discovered an enormous stone head partially buried in the earth. The head was carved from basalt and depicted a face with features unlike any known Mesoamerican people. It was the first evidence of the Olmec civilization, a culture so old it predated the Maya by 1,000 years. But by the time of that discovery, the Olmec had been gone for 2 millennia, and no one knew why. The Olmec were the first major civilization in Mesoamerica, flourishing from approximately 1500 to 400 BC. They built massive cities, carved colossal stone heads weighing up to 50 tons, developed the first writing system in the Americas, and invented the calendar that later civilizations would use. They were, in many ways, the mother culture of all Mesoamerican societies that followed. Then they vanished. Around 400 BC, Olmec cities were systematically abandoned. Their great stone heads were deliberately buried. Their monuments were defaced or destroyed. Population centers that had housed tens of thousands were left empty. Within a generation, the most advanced civilization in the Americas ceased to exist. What makes the Olmec disappearance particularly mysterious is how complete it was. When the Maya rose to prominence centuries later, they had no memory of the Olmec. Their cities had been consumed by jungle. Their writing system was lost. Even their name disappeared. Olmec is an Aztec word meaning rubber people, applied thousands of years after they vanished. Archaeological evidence suggests the end was deliberate and organized. The colossal heads weren't abandoned. They were carefully buried, as if being preserved or hidden. Some monuments show signs of ritual destruction. The pattern suggests the Olmec chose to disappear, methodically erasing their presence from the landscape. But where did they go? Millions of people can't simply vanish. Some researchers propose they migrated, becoming ancestors of later civilizations. Others suggest catastrophic environmental collapse. Still others point to the deliberate nature of the abandonment and suggest something stranger. Their colossal stone heads remain the most enduring mystery. The faces depicted don't resemble any known Mesoamerican people. Some researchers have noted features suggesting non-American origins. If the Olmec came from elsewhere, they left no record of where, and no trace of where they went when they departed. The island of High Brazil. For centuries, maps of the Atlantic Ocean included an island west of Ireland called High Brazil. Expeditions were launched to find it. Sailors claimed to have visited it. In 1674, a ship's captain even claimed to have spent an entire day on the island, meeting its inhabitants. Then, gradually, High Brazil disappeared from maps and from existence. The island first appeared on maps in 1325 and remained a consistent feature of Atlantic cartography for nearly 400 years. It was typically depicted as circular, sometimes divided by a central channel, located approximately 200 miles west of Ireland. Different maps placed it in slightly different locations, but its general position remained consistent. The accounts of those who claimed to visit High Brazil were remarkably specific. Captain John Nisbet's 1674 account described landing on the island in thick fog, finding it inhabited by large black rabbits and a mysterious magician who lived in a stone castle. His crew spent a day exploring before the fog lifted, and they sailed away. They brought back samples of gold and silver that were tested and authenticated by Irish authorities. Earlier accounts were equally detailed. Sailors described seeing the island from a distance, a green, hilly landmass perpetually shrouded in mist. Some expeditions claimed to have approached it only for the island to recede or disappear. Others landed briefly before conditions forced them to leave. Irish mythology provided context. High Brazil was said to be an island of the blessed, visible only once every 7 years, home to an advanced civilization that had withdrawn from the mortal world. Those who reached it found a paradise of eternal youth and wisdom. By the 1800s, improved navigation made it clear no island existed where High Brazil was supposed to be. It was quietly removed from maps and classified as legend. Perhaps a mirage, or a sandbank that had eroded, or simply a cartographic error. But the removal didn't explain detailed accounts of those who claimed to have visited. Captain Nisbet was a respected mariner whose crew corroborated his story. The gold and silver he brought back were real. Earlier visitors provided specific descriptions of geography, flora, and inhabitants. Modern researchers have noted that islands can appear and disappear due to volcanic activity, and that unusual atmospheric conditions can create convincing mirages. But these explanations require High Brazil to have been consistently misidentified in the same location over 4 centuries. The alternative explanation is stranger. An island existed west of Ireland for centuries, was visited by multiple expeditions, and then ceased to exist. These 10 accounts share a disturbing pattern. Explorers who found what they sought, documented their discoveries in detail, and then watched as those discoveries ceased to exist. From the lost city of Z to the giants of Patagonia, from the Olmec civilization to the island of High Brazil, something is happening that mainstream history cannot explain. The pattern is too consistent to dismiss. In case after case, explorers provided specific verifiable details about civilizations they encountered. Their accounts included information they couldn't have invented, languages, customs, artifacts, and locations that were later partially confirmed by archaeological discoveries. These weren't fantasists or liars. They were trained observers who documented what they saw. Yet when others tried to find what they had found, nothing remained. Cities had vanished beneath jungle canopy. Populations had migrated without trace. Islands had sunk or faded into mist. It's as if these civilizations existed only long enough to be witnessed, then chose to disappear. Some vanished civilizations left archaeological traces later discovered by modern technology. The Amazon cities visible only from satellites. The White City revealed by LiDAR. The Olmec heads buried deliberately in the earth. Others left nothing at all, existing only in the journals and photographs of those who found them. Several explanations present themselves, none entirely satisfactory. First, these civilizations existed but were destroyed by disease, warfare, environmental collapse, or natural disaster, so rapidly that nothing remained by the time subsequent expeditions arrived. This explains some cases, but not the deliberate nature of certain disappearances. Second, some civilizations may have actively hidden themselves, retreating to more remote locations, or concealing their settlements from outsiders. The warnings that several explorers reported receiving suggest this possibility. Third, and most disturbingly, some of these civilizations may never have existed in our conventional understanding of reality. Appearing to certain observers under certain conditions, then ceasing to be accessible. This would explain the consistent failure to relocate them despite detailed directions and maps. The explorers themselves paid a heavy price for their discoveries. Fawcett vanished in the jungle he tried to document. Morty died under suspicious circumstances. Middleton disappeared on his final expedition. Others were discredited, silenced, or quietly forgotten. The pattern suggests that finding these civilizations carried consequences extending beyond the discoveries themselves. What happened to the people who lived in these vanished places? The Omagua of the Amazon numbered in the millions before disease destroyed them. The Olmec systematically erased their own existence. The inhabitants of the White City abandoned their homes before recorded history. Something drives civilizations to disappear, whether by external force or internal choice. Perhaps the most unsettling possibility is that these disappearances continue. Remote regions still exist that have never been fully explored: deep jungle, high mountains, oceanic islands beyond regular shipping lanes. If civilizations can vanish so completely that only a single explorer's account remains, how many others might exist that have never been documented at all? The explorers who found civilizations that vanished were witnesses to something our understanding of history cannot accommodate. They saw peoples and places that ceased to exist, documented worlds that faded from reality, and tried to tell us what they had found. Most were not believed. Those who were believed couldn't prove their claims, but their accounts remain in archives and journals, waiting for someone to notice the pattern. 10 explorers, 10 civilizations, 10 disappearances. And a single disturbing question that echoes through history: what happens to civilizations that don't want to be found, or that can no longer be found by those who come looking?